Randy Johnson. This short video is about helping white people understand white guilt, shame, and the history of the United States of America. Let's define our terms. First, racism is that which serves to disadvantage and restrict people of color in ways that advance the interests of those in power, who, by the way, tend to be overwhelmingly white males. It's systemic, meaning that it's all over the place, not just a few places. It's not just a few bad apples, it's an infestation of our various social systems, such that it affects the whole. It's like a bit of poison in the water tank. A bit of it infects the whole, and the whole is affected by the bit. It has become so normalized that we don't even see it. But make no mistake, there is a bit of poison in the water tank. Our desired outcome is to reduce and eventually eliminate systemic racism. So, America the Beautiful, the recent outbreak of racist acts is a result of the ugly stain of racism that's always festered like a virus in our God Bless America society. Racism was part of the fabric of this Make America Great Again nation long before Washington crossed the Delaware. Slavery was the economic engine upon which this one nation under God was built. It was slavery that was used to pull the wealth from this land so that white people could live in big houses and drink lemonade out on the veranda while wearing hooped skirts. Racism comes in a variety of forms and flavors. For example, on the 4th of July, when people are all busy loving America, they often forget this silly little thing called manifest destiny. In the 19th century, this wacky, nutty, zany idea was used as an excuse to decimate indigenous peoples and confiscate their land. Now, white males in meetings with other white males convinced themselves once upon a time that there was something very uniquely special about white males and the institutions they had designed. So they decided that God wanted them to rape, pillage, murder, and commit genocide so that the continent could be theirs and everybody could have freedom and independence, except for black people and indigenous people, and people from China, and women, and gay people, and I don't think they much cared for Latinx people either. But everyone else was definitely in the special club. God bless America. Now, in the book An Indigenous People's History of the United States, Roseanne Dunbar Ortiz says that the very existence of our country is dependent on the looting of an entire continent and its resources. Colonization, dispossession, settler colonialism, and genocide, these are the terms that drill to the core of U.S. history, to the very source of our country's existence. And these same very special white men who are out manifesting their destiny all over the place have the audacity to call indigenous peoples savages. Savages. Now, to be clear, a savage is defined as a brutal or cruel person, or people who are uncivilized or primitive. So, to be clear, the people who are raping, pillaging, murdering, stealing, and committing genocide called the people who are not doing these things savages. How does that work? So let's address white guilt, shame, and a little honesty. Disclaimer, it must be acknowledged that I am a white man. My whiteness is all that I have ever lived and experienced. As such, I can never fully understand what it means to be a person of color living in our society. But I, like others, am trying to get my small piece of this right. And while I should never lead the conversation or appropriate the discussion, we all need to be a part of it. Now, on a personal level, I feel no guilt or shame for the systemic racism in our country, and I feel no guilt or shame about not feeling guilt and shame. Now let me explain before you send me emails. Guilt involves being aware of our wrongful or improper deeds or behaviors and how they may have hurt others. It's the feeling of responsibility for some action, real or imagined, or an awareness that we've done something improper or wrong. Shame may arise from guilt, but it's technically a bit different. Shame is related to how we appear to ourselves or others. It's a painful feeling forming in consciousness, stemming from something dishonorable, improper, lacking, deficient, or deviant that was done, or with which one is associated. Shame is not always related to an action. It can also be related to a condition, such as a perceived physical or mental disability or disorder. Now, shame often occurs as a result of guilt, but not always. Indeed, there are people who appear to feel no shame, even though they are fully aware of their wrongful or improper actions. These people are called psychopaths. According to the DSM-5, they have an antisocial personality disorder or a narcissistic personality disorder. Now, as stated above, a psychopath feels no sense of guilt, shame, or remorse. Thus, we must conclude that the writers of U.S. history, for the most part, are either willfully ignorant or psychopaths. For now, let's go with psychopaths as it seems a bit more complimentary. Now, I grew up on the McGraw-Hill version of reality, which is a bit different than actual reality. I would recommend any of these powerful, well-written books. These are just some of the books that provide a view of U.S. history that is a bit different from the whitewashed McGraw-Hill version of reality. The McGraw-Hill version of reality seems to prance lightly upon the slavery and exploitation of human beings at the beginning of our land of the free country. This is hard to look at because we know it is true, but this is our U.S. history. It also seems to dismiss the Holocaust on this continent that consumed millions of indigenous peoples. Oops. So, while I appreciate and am grateful for the many aspects of our country, and I am generally proud of our system of democracy and the freedoms it allows us, I also recognize our racist U.S. history and the systemic racism that lingers. For this, I feel a collective guilt and shame for our nation. So, on a personal level, as I stated, I feel no guilt. I'm not trying to perpetuate a wrong. I'm trying to do what I can. Neither do I feel shame on a personal level. However, I feel anger, disgust, dismay at the injustices, the inequities, discrimination, and atrocities that have occurred and continue to occur as a result of systemic racism. For this, I am deeply ashamed of our country on a collective level. Now, some people say, well, why don't you move to Canada? When I make statements about collective guilt and shame. If you're ashamed of our country, why don't you leave? If you hate our country, go someplace else, is the saying. However, these kind of comments usually come from people who see themselves as patriotic because they wave a flag and stand at attention during the national anthem. However, this "why don't you leave it if you don't like it" response is the most unpatriotic response imaginable. Now, an analogy. If you love your family, you don't leave it if you recognize that there are difficulties. You stay and try to make it better. If you love your family, you do not ignore or gloss over problems as they arise. You acknowledge them and you work to solve them. In the same way, If you love your country, you recognize the difficulties. If you love your country, you stay and try to make it better. If you love your country, you try to solve the problems, one of which is systemic racism that's eating away at us. An honest, reflective analysis does not make one unpatriotic. What would be unpatriotic would be to turn the other way, to do nothing, to simply wave a bunch of flags and sing, "God bless America." That would be unpatriotic. But I and many others refuse to be unpatriotic. The idea that if you seek change, you hate America, this is decidedly un-American. And I refuse to be un-American. This American experiment will continue to evolve and refine itself only to the degree that we're able to honestly reflect and address the problems that confront us. Systemic racism has never been fully addressed in our society, in our cultural, in our educational systems. Systemic racism calls for a systemic response.